Leonora Carrington must have had a subtle, mischievous, and often wicked sense of humour, as she often used this in her paintings. The 1947 portrait of the late Mrs. Partridge seems to be one of Leonora Carrington's ironic jokes. When asked by Edward James about who this Mrs. Partridge was, she replied, "She lived highly respected, and is still remembered as the better half of poor Colonel Partridge. When she died, the neighbours sighed. She was fey, but she was country." Also from 1947 is "Again the Gemini are in the orchard." Carrington depicts a walled orchard within which we see a pair of twins, one in yellow and another in red. They are being observed by another pair of twins in dark cloaks, and below them on the left are twin cats. On the right, another pair of twins are working, planting sunflowers. Above these two figures is a tall and narrow thatched hut, supported by a pair of twin figures, one of which is inverted. Carrington's orchard is filled with twins. In her painting, Bird Pong of 1949, within a dark red ochre room, two human figures, one with feathered wings, play a game of ping-pong across a hexagonal table with 6 nets. Instead of balls, they are using birds. One bird lies as if dead, discarded under the table. The window above the table looks out upon a beautiful garden, a more amenable realm for the birds. Also in that year, Leonora created the delightfully entitled "The Artist Travelling Incognito." This is likely to be a humorous self-portrait, showing herself with 5 eyes, wearing a loose golden dress with white petticoats and a red shawl. A cat head peers out of the lower part of the dress. She walks holding an umbrella and is accompanied by a white cat and a green parrot that she holds up in a round, transparent globe. It would be hard to find any image that could attract more attention than this incongruous group of travelling companions. In 1961, she created The Expedition of Dr. Ramsbottom. Here, a party of 9 explorers sit in a bowl-like wicker basket on the back of a hairy elephant. They attentively examine the terrain and its vegetation as they go forward on their expedition. The Birdmen of Burnley was created in 1970. Burnley is a northern town in Britain. You see 3 birdmen with conical hats. Carrington often used this image of the conical hat that was mandatory for Jews to wear during the 13th century medieval anti-Semitism. One holds a book whose pages are in the shape of moths or butterfly wings. From it, some moths fly out. The words on the books are Chemistry, Birds of Britain. One of these birdmen has his hand and arm formed into a bird's neck and head. They approach 2 bird cages, within which are a number of birds. On the floor below are some texts, some parts of which are written in mirror writing, a device that Leonora often used. These read, "The birds of prey, the vulture from the far mountain, a homely thought." 1970, end of the patriarch's rule as the earth's fossil. The chemistry of birds in the cage with 24 bars, being the song and the bridge of iron, guarded by the chemistry of birds in the cage. with 24 bars. Grandmother Moorhead's Aromatic Kitchen was painted in 1975. This was a fantastic realising of Leonora Carrington's matriarchal grandmother from Moate in County Westmeath in Ireland. In 1977, she created the amusing painting, a fish dressed as a bottle and a mule dressed as a crocodile. In her painting, Big Badger Meets the Dominie Boys of 1984, 3 Catholic choir boys, the Dominie Boys, approach a badger in its den or set. One of them holds a bowl, probably about to offer it food. Another choir boy seems to be holding onto his Bible or choir book. Crone Flower of 1987. In a paved courtyard, 3 elderly ladies, the Crones, examine a strange red flower that has emerged from the paving. They seem puzzled, and one uses a magnifying glass to view it in more detail. Some cats gather around, also curious as to what is going on. 2 years earlier, the terrible Mexico City earthquake had severely damaged the city, so much so that the infrastructure, such as pavements and roads, had not all been repaired. In 1987, she created a portrait, Ms. Ashton, New York, of the critic and art historian Doré Ashton. Ashton was an early advocate for the New York School and abstract expressionism, though she also had an interest in Surrealism. As we have seen in many of her paintings, as well as through her map diagram, Leonora Carrington was very drawn to depicting animals in her work, though she avoided the sentimentality that often accompanies the depiction of animals. We will look at only a few examples here. We noticed in her early work that she often used the image of a horse, to which she seems to have identified at that time. Her painting The Cats of 1952 shows her fascination for these animals, which later appear in stylized form in many of her paintings. The Garden of the Genie, also named as Ulu's Pants of 1952, depicts a garden in the form of a labyrinth. A red-headed figure guards a chamber on the right, surmounted by a sphinx, in which is seen a large egg. This is apparently a reference to the Egyptian god Khnum, who fashioned the bodies of human children out of clay and placed them into their mothers' wombs. A parade of hybrid animal forms approaches the womb or chamber. A similar parade of animal forms is found in her occult scene, also named Jacob's Ladder, of 2 years earlier. In 1953, she created the masterful Are You Really Serious? This is one of her complex puns. She had been fascinated by the dog star Sirius and had created 3 paintings on this theme before working on this one. Here she shows a temple enclosed by a high wall. In the sky at the centre is the bright star Sirius. Below is a ritual space in which a cat-headed goddess figure, adorned with hieroglyphics, sits on the left opposite the jackal-headed Anubis. On the left is what is probably a depiction of the Egyptian goddess of the dark sky, Neat, who is said to reweave the world anew each day on her loom. Here is the Sacrament at Minos of 1954. Knossos in Crete was the centre of the Minoan bull cult. Two animals, a white and a black, fight in an underground chamber, while immediately above them, two priests in animal form enact a ritual mimicking the action below. Carrington often used bird forms. In her Bird Birthing of 1962, a strange feathered figure crouches on the right, working a bellows to increase the fire below a large alchemical flask, within which we see birds being born from the flames and rising up into the neck of the flask to presumably fly out the top through the trapdoor in the ceiling. Under the flask, in the furnace, are the bodies of dead birds. Although this alchemist is necessary for this work, we see on the left a dark-robed figure with a mask head, like a Veronica veil, above which is a kind of halo or even crown of thorns. This figure, which could be seen as an image of Christ, holds out its hand and appears to be projecting a bird's soul into the flask. This figure carries on its shoulder a transparent flask or sack containing other bird soul forms. Her untitled 7 gouaches of 1969 work with various animal forms. Another work from that year is Lepidopteros, in which a group of moth or butterfly-headed human hybrids sit around a table and feast on fruits. Leonora Carrington had strong political beliefs, though she rarely voiced these in the public arena or directly in her work. But there are a few examples of her political and social concerns that emerge in her paintings. In 1968, she created the political poster Lepidoptera, responding to the emergence at that time of opposition to the repressive authority of the entrenched government. She included a verse from John Donne's poem The Damp. Poor victories, but if you dare be brave, and pleasure in your conquest have, first kill the enormous giant, your disdain, and let the enchantress Honour next be slain. And like a Goth and Vandal rise, defaced records and histories of your own arts and triumphs over men, and without such advantage, kill me then. Some 2 months after she created this, Mexican government forces massacred student protesters who had gathered in the capital in advance of the Olympics. Carrington was appalled and devastated and left Mexico for a while. Her painting Operation Wednesday of 1969 may, at first glance, seem rather sinister, but when we read it in the context of the political struggles in 1968, we find something rather different. The doctor in this scene was Dr. Fernando Ortiz Monasterio, a plastic surgeon who had treated the horrendous wounds of the victims of the Tlatelolco student massacre. The memento mori aspect of the painting is clear in the skeleton who writes the opening words of Psalm 22, later quoted by Christ on the cross. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And Carrington adds the second verse, thou hearest not, and in the night season, and am not silent. In 1972, she designed the cover for the feminist magazine Mujeres Conciencia. She pictures a return to the Garden of Eden. The tree grows up the centre line and is enveloped in a cross at its base. The serpent spirals out from the centre of this cross. Eve on the left appears to be handing back a light apple to Adam on the right, and seems to hold out her hand to receive in turn a dark apple from him. Leonora Carrington, whose life up to this time was often a battle against repressive male figures, generalises this to the struggle of women for freedom from patriarchal oppression, which she saw as embodied in Christianity and other monotheistic religions. She wanted the patriarchal myth of the temptation in Genesis to be reversed or turned on its head. The next lesson in this series is on Leonora Carrington's later work.